In this lesson, we'll talk about social class and conformity. And by conformity here, we mean the idea that we tend to internalize the behaviors, the beliefs, the values of the group in which we are situated. Some years ago, PBS had a documentary called People Like Us, and they featured families from different social classes. And they asked about their upbringing and their life experiences and how social class either was or was not something that was on their mind as they went through life in America. So let's take this group down here. Okay, they're part of, say, the lower class, or just a lower class relative to this class, right? There were a couple of interesting things that people would report about their class, especially if they were attempting to rise above their class of birth and to improve their socioeconomic status, right? Sometimes they reported that they would get negative feedback from family members or peers. And this saying over here captures this idea: don't rise above your raisin. You know, there's that sense that if you're trying to rise up the social ladder, you're sort of leaving behind the people that you knew and grew up with and so on. Like somehow you're too good for them, right? You're trying to be better. And so that is experienced as a negative attitude, right? So in a sense, there's that social penalty for trying to improve your social class position, that others in that group are going to see you as sort of defecting from the people who you knew all your life. Others reported that they just sort of wanted to be like the members of their group. And so here then the concept of conformity would come into play, that you internalize the values and the aspirations and the worldviews of the group in which you're situated, and to depart from that, there comes a penalty again, a kind of a negative feedback, right? You will stand out if you start to have different aspirations or different beliefs or whatever, or pursue different types of career paths or something. Of course, once you get up to some higher class status, you might look back down and have all kinds of stereotypes about the class from which you just came, and we'll study stereotypes a little bit later. So it got psychologists thinking about, do social classes differ with respect to values and attitudes and how they see each other and how they see other classes. And so psychologists wanted to come up with measures to detect any differences in the attitudes or worldviews of different social classes. And one of the measures is a very simple one. So imagine you volunteered for an experiment, and as maybe a parting gift, you get to take home a pen. And so here are 5 pens, 4 green ones and a red one. You're simply asked to choose a pen. Right? Now, what psychologists have done is presented this choice to members of different social classes. Interestingly, there's a difference in the way people are making choices, and it varies depending on their social class. For example, working class, WK here for working class. Working class individuals tend to choose from among the majority pens, right? If most of the pens are green, they will tend to choose a majority colored pen. Middle class, higher status individuals have a tendency to choose the minority pen. And one way we might think about this is this notion of what the choice is signaling. What does it say about the individual? And here the psychologists hypothesize that the choice for the working class individual is sort of is signaling a connection to others. In other words, it's okay to take a pen that's like several others in the display. The middle class here, the hypothesis is that this choice is signaling independence, that the one that's different is more attractive to the middle class individual. Perhaps that says something about their psychology, their worldview, that being different is valued in a way different from the middle class or from the working class. Here's the actual data here in the percent choosing the pen. Working class, middle class, the dark bar would be the minority pen, and the light bar the majority pen. So in our case, the green pen, the red pen for working class. Preference for the majority pen. the middle class, you don't see that. In fact, you see a preference for the minority pen. Now you might think, well, this is such a simple choice, right? But again, we can use this as a measure, and they are finding reliable differences in the choices that people from these different class backgrounds are making. Now, how do we think about this? Well, the authors talk about this model of agency, right? So this idea that you in society, you are one who goes through life and you are either more or less empowered. You're going to be making decisions, and your decisions will reflect whether you want to carve out some independent self-identity and be expressive and unique and so on, or maybe you want to signal sort of connection with your group, in which case maybe you want to be sort of like your group. You want to be similar to those in your group, right? So we can think of this model of agency as including norms for action, your behaviors, norms for relationships, and these things are revealed by your choices. So again, the idea is the working class choice here for the majority pen is signaling sort of a desire to connect, and the middle class signaling a desire for independence from others. Now notice in the working class, and this might be at odds with the dominant discourse, our culture, to the extent that middle class values maybe tend to be predominant in our culture then, it may be sort of through media and just through sort of all kinds of cultural messages, might be sort of promoting the value of independence and individualism and being different and unique and special. Yet the working class behavior would be, and the working class worldview then would be in tension with that dominant discourse, so to speak. Now, in this experiment, what they did was they asked the subjects to choose a pen, but right after they chose a pen, then they had somebody else come along and choose a pen. And they either chose the same pen as the subject of the experiment, or they chose the different one, right? And then they asked the subject of the experiment how much did they like their choice based on the knowledge of whether somebody chose the same pen as them or somebody chose a different pen. Did it make a difference? It turns out that if the other chose the same pen, well, then working class individuals tended to like that their own choice more if somebody else came along afterwards and chose the same type of pen. You didn't find that, or they didn't find that effect for the middle class individuals, right? So if they're choosing the minority pen and somebody else comes along and chooses the same minority one, that did not significantly affect their liking of the pen that they chose. Here's the data. The different condition is when the second person comes along, chooses a different pen. The similar is when they come along and choose the same pen. Working class, middle class. So in the working class condition, the similar condition, they show higher liking for the pen that they chose. When somebody else, right after, chooses the same pen, you don't get that kind of effect for the middle class. Now, one way to think about this is maybe in the working class context, there's a preference for similarity, sort of being sort of like your group, right? And a preference for differentiation in the middle class context. Now the authors are going to understand this or interpret this by saying that the working class choice here to be sort of similar to others is an intentional adjustment to the other's desires. They want to fit in, show connection with their group, right? Whereas in the middle class, the desire again was to be different, to differentiate the self from others, from the more common thing in the environment. But of course, you could also use the concept of conformity to analyze this middle class behavior, right? So in a sense, they're conforming to a norm of differentiation, right? To individuation. In other words, if the cultural message is be different, be special, be unique, right? Be your own person, wear your hair this way, make it blue or red, or get the tattoo, or be different somehow. Well, then we can think of that as also conformity, but it's just a conformity to a different type of norm. The norm, instead of being connected to others, but rather being different from others. It raises the question: why would middle class individuals have this type of norm? Why would they be embracing this? You know, is there some kind of status anxiety? Are they just wanting to be different because they want to show themselves to be somehow superior to others? Is there some kind of cultural recognition that the lower orders on the social ladder tend to be more sort of interested in similarity, so therefore individuation would signal higher status in society? You know, so there are various hypotheses about some of the underlying psychology here. In another experiment, researchers asked people from either working class or upper middle class groups this question. So imagine, so that they ask you to imagine your favorite car. So you're going to go buy a car the next day, and you buy that car, right? But then imagine that a friend gets the same exact car a day after you do. How would you feel upon learning that for the first time? So here's the data categorized into positive responses, negative responses, ambivalent, and so on. The firefighters represent the working class, and the MBA students represent the middle upper class. Percent of firefighters saying that there would be a positive response, higher than the middle upper class, right? Negative responses, more prevalent among the middle upper class than the working class. In other words, the working class individuals are okay. They're more okay with with learning that a friend gets the same exact car, right? The middle upper class individuals have more negative responses to learning that information. So it's again, it's kind of like this idea with the pens here. When for the working class, if somebody chooses the same pen, that's seen as a positive thing, right? So we have a similar result with the car study, but in the car study, the middle class participants were more negative. Here, it didn't really make much difference for the pen, but for the car, there was more negative reaction to that. So what we see then are differences. These experiments are showing reliable differences in just some of these choices that people are making. And psychologists think these choices are reflecting some of their attitudes and values. Middle class and working class individuals are making different kinds of choices. Now, in the past, this concept of conformity was seen in a negative light, that if these folks are conforming to what others in their group have, that this was seen as a deficiency of their autonomy. And we'll get into some of that classic research in social psychology. But the more modern research is taking a different approach to this, that rather this conformity in the working class, the greater conformity in the choices, is expressing solidarity, right? And the middle class, again, is this norm of individuation, be different. And as for why it is that the working class, may have this sort of greater conformity, greater conformity, some researchers hypothesize that, well, in a working class context, you may not have the resources to be individuating yourself, right? And so you may be in a position where getting the same kinds of things as people in your neighborhood or people in your peer group is just more accessible. That to be different might require more resources and so on that just isn't available in the working class context. But those are hypotheses at this point. More research is needed.